In 2010, there was a whole movement about Africa at 50. A lot of African countries were becoming independent, and I was part of this organizing committee of Africa at 50, and it included a lot of teachers, professors, scholars, community activists. But one of the things that were missing, I was the only young person, and they put programs together, but they also really did not focus on youth and young people. What are the students? What about the students who are in school right now and are looking to either move back home or trying to make an impact back home? And how can they start here? And so I pushed for an agenda that was student related, of course, because I was the only one. I was pretty much vetoed out. So there had always been this idea that I wanted to start an organization, and it was going to be called Africa for Africa. And during the years, it changed because I wanted to create something where Africans would actually build their own capacity instead of waiting for the one organization, which I had worked for a year in DC, and all this, the Global Fund for, malaria and all the stuff. And instead of waiting for them to be funding all these initiatives in Africa, why can't Africans do it for themselves? And one of the things I realized was that it had to start with young people, the students, because if you don't build the students right now and give them the ability to actually go back or give back, then they really, over the years, they become too busy that they don't really know how to reintegrate themselves back into their communities, whether it's in the diaspora or in the continent. So basically in last year, early last year, I approached Okenfe and I was like, listen, I want to put a huge symposium together. And basically it's going to be about leadership and how we can start leading now. Instead of waiting for us to become leaders in a different capacity when we grow up, why don't we start discussing those issues now? So by the time we come to be, we're ready. And so that's how we came. And so we sat down and we put together a whole team. He brought his own people, I brought some people that I knew, and we pretty much sat down and told the team, this is what we're doing, this is what we want to do, if you're on board, this is what it'll take. And we had 12 people, and some of them moved out of the country, so some of them are actually back in Africa. But now we have 8 executive members as of this year. And all of them are really taking different capacity building for the organization. Well, it's funny enough, I just came from Burundi, and I had this, when I went to Burundi, I had this question, I was like, okay, so I want to plug into the community. I want to plug into the leadership in Burundi, and I wanted to see what people are doing. And so, I had these conversations with some ministers, some people in leadership in the country, and went up country, talked to all the older generation, just talking to them about the ideas of youth and the idea of Africans in the diaspora and the young people and what they're doing. And strange enough, it's the same thing when I went last year to Ghana, and we were talking about these whole ideas of leadership and young people. And I think that as young people, we've really become scared of the whole, the status quo as we understand it, or as we've been taught to understand, that, older people will not understand us. Older people will not, they will belittle our ideas. There is something about approaching someone in the correct way. We can be respectful about their feelings, about their position, that they're older and they have more experience. But we can also be assertive in how we approach them. If you, as young people, if you bring an idea and you tell them the why and the how and the when and all those, and you have a plan, they will listen. So our goal is, as young people, is to teach, first of all, the young people, our generation, that you can bridge that gap between the old and the young and the old. And that, older people are they're not so stupid or stuck into the old ways as we would like to think. Because there's a certain amount of openness with the older generation. And I think they are now seeing, with all the whole movements, and youth, and if you read the introduction to the whole symposium, you read about movements in Soweto, in Congo. There were movements in South Sudan. And now we see this whole rising movement of young people, and we see a lot of innovation, ingenuity. And it's not something that's new, but it's something that has taken root. And I think that the older generation, our fathers and our mothers, they're realizing that, they have to think differently. And I think the whole idea of young people really becoming leaders and starting to assert their leadership skills and learn and stop talking about the issues and actually start working towards whatever solution they see. It's not something that's new, but it's something that needs to be discussed and then needs to be acted upon. And the thinking has to change both for the older generation and for the new generation. And so you'll notice one of the things we do is that when we bring panels together, we bring young people and the older generation that has been here and leading for years. And so you see the dynamic in panels that there are those who have been here, some of them who might disagree with what we're doing, some of them will be in support, but then you see the dynamic of the young people on the panel who have already been doing, what they're doing for either 2 years, 3 years. For example, today we have one of the panelists, his name is Dalmuzi, he goes to Harvard, and he is, when I saw his resume and, started talking to him, he's one of those very impressive leaders. Undergraduate, he already has his own organization in Zimbabwe. It's called Leaders Today. And he's one of those examples that he's been able to just bridge that gap between what the old thought or what the old guard would think on leadership and what it means for young people and young people to assert their ideas. And I think for us, the challenge is to tell young people that we need you to stop thinking that older people will not respect your ideas. Because they will if you do it and approach it respectively. Because respect is not just a value that it's not just a value between the old and the young. It's an overall when you're doing business, when you're talking to people. If there is that sense of respect and understanding, then the whole idea of you're too young, you don't know what you're talking about, that whole idea gets put aside, because then there's that mutual understanding and that mutual meeting ground. Well, what I want to get out of it is just really finding ways that now we can move forward. Like, how is it, first of all, for the young people, what's the next step? Because we have already been doing, the whole role of the youth in renegotiating our role in the world. Africa's place in the world is already being established. The question is, are the youth going to join the movement, or are we going to be left aside and let other people decide for us? It's the same thing for the women versus men paradigm. Are the women going to stand aside and let the men sit at the deciding table, while Africa's place is being renegotiated at the moment? You look at the figures, and Africa has not really, it's not Africa is rising. Africa has risen, and now it continues to grow. So the problem then becomes, how do we change our thinking? And that's what I want to get out of it. How do we change our thinking from, what the economists would have called the dark continent to here is a bright future? How do you change that thinking where the youth now can change their world and build capacity, basically be, as Lillian Ajayi, for one of the panelists said, be the 1% that's going to change. Instead of looking up at the 1% that leads and they have the money, but what about being the 1% that actually changes the whole paradigm? And it is and it's something to look forward to. I am excited. I'm probably a little bit weird because I really get excited about people talking about things and then having mentorship. One of the things I like mentorship because it really is the old and young coming together, learning, and then volunteering. We are, as Africans, we whole think that, money, you work, you get money. How about building skills? Entrepreneurship. How do you start your own business? And what is the role of that in really positioning Africa? How do you change Africa from being the African fashion design? I have Kweku and Nana, who are fashion designers. And one of the things I always will ask them, how is it that Africa fashion has become, actually it's called fashion, and it's not a caricature, it's not a costume. If you look back in history and how African clothes and African fashion was deemed, and that is slowly changing. So what is the role of young fashion designers? What is the role of young businessmen, businesswomen? What is the role of social entrepreneurs? What are the role as they're coming out of school, as they're starting their businesses? How do they understand that the next step is for you to position yourself as an ambassador for this new Africa?
We say to ourselves that those leaders are corrupted, that they pretty much obey to the West, and many of them do what works for them, and creating the relationships with the West that work only for them, not for the people. When they're sick, they don't get treatment in Africa, they go abroad.
Outside, yes.
When they want their kids to be educated, they send them abroad. But when you look at it too, we left Africa, we came abroad also to study, but many of us don't leave because now we're comfortable in the West. So don't you have the feeling that what we reproach our leaders, we're doing pretty much the same thing? We both by the West in a certain way.
I would say that's harsh on people who are here because, true, we're not there. I think the difference is knowing how to engage. Because if you're in Africa, yes, deal with policies, work on the ground, because everything that has to happen in Africa really has to happen on the ground. Leave the politics in Africa. And when you come here, then you engage Africa in a whole different way, in a whole different level. I'm not going to ask somebody who fled their country 20 years ago because they were being chased away to go back when they have no idea how to engage Africa or their country anymore, their community for that matter. But what it is about the resources that we get here going back. We might be as guilty, which I think it's a little bit, I think we're guilty, but not as culpable as the leaders. What we need to do is build capacity here so that they can go back home, or encourage the movement down in the ground by giving them the resources they need. That can happen here. Asking people to move, being guilt, the whole guilt. If we keep giving ourselves that we're guilty, nothing will be done. Let's accept we're here. You can, what are your choices if you're here? A, B, C. You can go back, use your resources back home. You can stay here, but work towards, whether it's organizations here that are doing work back home, whether it's organizations that are building capacity here so that those resources can go back home. Give your time, give your money here so you can go back home. Or you can stay here and say, you know what, I am not there and I'm not willing to participate, so I shut up. stay away from the politics. If you're not doing anything here or there to help the situation, because we can talk about corruption until our heads are off. We can talk about bad leadership, because bad leadership is not specific to Africa. Corruption is not specific to Africa. Poverty is not specific to Africa. It's just the amount of each of these problems that are in Africa. So criticizing people because they're corrupt, what do you do about that corruption? Why is it there is corruption in Africa? Then you figure that out, you problematize it, and find solution. Criticizing somebody because they're a bad leader. They're bad leaders here. And the only thing about why here there's no like revolutions every time there's like elections is because there's a system to absorb it. But the system was not created because there was good leaders. It was because the people got together and first of all said, this is what we want. They fought for it. So in my opinion, yes, if you're here in your AC, in your good clothes and cars and everything, and then you're criticizing people back home, you need to check yourself. And that's why I'm saying, how can we gradually go back, make that impact? And you start by young people, the people who are in school, because they come here in school, and nobody is there to give them the support. Nobody is reminding them, this is where Africa, this is what Africa is all about. Because Africa, it has all this crap, but it is a beautiful, beautiful place. Africa, it's one of those continents that it really tugs your heart. It really demands your reaction. It really demands a reaction. And if you don't remind somebody when they come here that, listen, your mind also needs to be back home as you're studying, as you're doing all these things. How do you go back home? Whether you choose to stay here, but how do you end up really making an impact back home? And you need to remind students, you need to remind young people, you need to mentor them, you need to give them a space they can come and discuss and be free to discuss these ideas. And then find ways of helping them and supporting them. If they want to go back home, how do we make that happen? And that's the basic thing. That is the heart of the organization. How do you make that happen?
What's next now after this
this
event?
What's next is we're doing a volunteer initiative with FVC, which works in Tanzania. So we're going to try and start sending volunteers back home. But that's a long-term project, definitely. But before that, we're going to teach young people. Like my team, we're working on marketing for young people, presentation, teaching young Africans. And this is really, and I feel biased, but this is really to teach Africans, how do you integrate yourself? So we want to connect African students to African organizations and African initiatives and give them volunteer, be an intern. But before that, if you are going to find a job or if you're going to go back home, how do you learn the values of marketing yourself? Learn the values of starting a business. And those are the programs we're working on. So you'll hear more about it.
How to help or contribute?
How do you help? Well, contributions, we're launching a new website where you can donate online. But most of that, we want feedback. We want bodies, people who can have different skills, and people who can mentor, people who can volunteer for different organizations. Because we do want to give African organizations, connect them to young people in the US. We want them, instead of like having an intern who's American, why not have an intern who's African, and you can actually teach them the value of what your organization is doing. So basically we need, people who want to be interns in different organizations, people who want to come on board with us and become members and be regular contributors, whether it's during the panels or whether it's during, our different programs. So we want all of those people, but more than anything, we want to hear what people are doing. What are young people doing? What's
the website address?
The website is www.thecyal.org, and you can also find us on Twitter, the CYL. Find us on Facebook, but mostly you can send us email at thecyl@gmail.com.